Hello, and welcome to Esoterica and Nonsense, a podcast where we discuss myths, legends, folk tales, fairy tales, supernatural phenomenon, and religions from around the world. I am your host, Annabelle, and I'm speaking on a spooky Capricorn evening. Today, we are going to talk about vampires, specifically vampires from Eastern Europe and Nosferatu. How did the myth of vampires start and eventually turn into a cultural classic, Nosferatu? We are going to talk about the curse of the alleged original film. We are going to talk about the rumors of the original actor who played Nosferatu, as well as a lot of other dogmatic hearsay, rumors, beliefs about vampires. Where do all of these ideas come from? Garlics, wooden stake, holy water. Where did it all begin? I'm so glad you asked. Let's jump into it. First of all, I do want to mention that vampires are a very vast topic. They have variations around the world. This episode specifically is about Eastern European vampires and how it eventually became the tale of Dracula and eventually Nosferatu. So, firstly, the origins and characteristics of vampires from Eastern Europe. Mostly we're talking about Slovakia, the Czech Republic, we're talking about Germany, some parts of Austria. And in these areas, vampires are considered to be undead, meaning that they have died and then become vampires. They feed on the blood and life force of the living. They often are considered to be reanimated by spirits or demons. I think this is also important to remember. I think a lot of modern vampires, we think of them being drained by a vampire and then they turn on the verge of death. But in original Eastern European belief, these people are fully dead and then a demon or spirit repossesses them. I think that's an interesting distinction. So, oftentimes, modern vampires are depicted to be suave, often romantic and very sexual, and we're going to get to that in a second. But original vampires were considered to be completely grotesque. They were depicted being bloated, having reddish or darkened skin. And they obviously often were depicted with sharp teeth, but also claws. And they were believed to have arisen from improper burials, also suicides, people who committed crimes while they were alive, people who practiced witchcraft, as well as individuals who are considered to be cursed at some point through their life. In some parts of Eastern Europe, they believed that babies born with deformities or certain birthmarks were more likely to be predisposed to becoming vampires. So, here are some honorable mentions. In Germanic folklore, there is the Nachzerher, meaning the after-devourer. And in German folklore, the Nachzerher is a type of vampire that feeds on its own shroud or body in the grave, causing harm to its family or community through sympathetic magic. Isn't that interesting? It's like manipulation from the dead. I kind of live for that. So, allegedly, the signs to spot an after-devourer or a Nachzerer is that corpses found with open mouths or chewed burial shrouds were suspected of being these creatures. So, to prevent this, people would place coins or stones in the mouths of the dead to prevent them from chewing their shrouds. And I think that's so interesting. Obviously, maybe animals were getting in to their caskets, and obviously bloating is a really common thing when people die. So I do just find it really interesting that they would put coins in their mouth. It also does remind me that ancient Egypt, they would often put coins in the mouths of people so that they could pay the toll in the underworld. Right? I think that's a thing. So another type of vampire in Germanic folklore was known as the Druden. These were nightmare spirits. Sometimes they were connected to vampire lore, but sometimes they were depicted more as demons. Drudens were basically like witches or spirits that were known to sit on a person's chest at night and drain their energy and cause them nightmares. And this sounds exactly like a sleep paralysis demon. I've never had them, but I know a lot about them. I know some people who've had them, and I've done some research on my own, and it seems to be a really common experience. I couldn't put a percentage to it, but it seems that most people who've experienced sleep paralysis have experienced some kind of dark, like shadow sitting on their chest. And I think that's really interesting. And so according to Germanic folklore, these are almost like energy vampires, like Colin Robinson. If you've ever had sleep paralysis, please write in. I'd love to hear about that. Okay, so some honorable mentions of vampires in Eastern European folklore were the upir or upior. These are a type of Slavic vampire, also mentioned in Russian folklore and Polish folklore. And these are considered like one of the first vampire legends, the upior or upir. And they are like classic. They're known for consuming victims' blood and flesh. However, there's also another kind of vampire called the Strygia. This is a Polish vampire, and the Strygia was thought to be a vampiric demon created when someone was born with 2 souls and 2 hearts. After they died, their second soul would rise, and then they would prey on the living. Isn't that? I find that one to be really interesting. That like someone would be born with 2 souls and 2 hearts, and the second soul would rise again, come again. I think that's so fascinating to me. Okay, then in Romania, and Romania I feel like is the one that is maybe the most infamous, because this is where Transylvania is. And Romania is kind of like, I think in modern day, we associate vampires from being from Romania. So in Romania, they have a few different kinds of vampires. There is the strigoi, which is a restless spirit that rises from the grave to harm the living. Then there's the strigoi V, which is like the living version of the strigoi. And these are witches or cursed individuals who could turn into vampires after death. There's the strigoi morti, which is like the dead strigoi. And these are vampires who came back to life to torment their families. And then there's the moroi, which were often confused with strigoi. However, the moroi were spirits of unbaptized children. Oh, please. Or those who died prematurely, sometimes described as phantom vampires. Oh, okay, yeah, this sounds like churchaganda. If you don't get baptized, you're going to become a vampire, please. So also a few other honorable mentions that in Bulgarian culture, there are vampires described as shadowy spirits or reanimated corpses that could transform into animals or sometimes even fog and mist. And the reason I kind of touch on all of those briefly because vampires are a really vast subject. And I think in modern day, we do think of like this Nosferatu character or this Dracula character, whatever. Maybe you think about True Blood or Interview with a Vampire, Twilight. We think of these people with pale skin who are hot and attractive, who seduce people. Maybe they hypnotize, maybe they read minds. But in most cultures, and this is, I think, like a worldwide thing, like the vampire archetype is usually more either demonic or beast-like. And even from Eastern Europe, this seems to be a common theme. Now, let's get into some like details of where a lot of these ideas may have come from. And this is where things get really interesting for me. So, of course, like a really big part of these beliefs is rooted in fear of witchcraft. And I do think that as Christianity became more widely accepted, that did become a part of vampiric lore even more. You know, people practicing sorcery. I mean, it could literally just be herbal medicine, but that would kind of play into this idea of them being sinners and working with dark spirits. So sorcery and witchcraft is a huge part of these myths, like really catching fire. But another really big thing was grave disturbances. Any kind of body that was unearthed, maybe from a grave robber, maybe from an animal, like this really rattled people and scared people. And especially if the body was undecayed for some reason, that scared people. Like perhaps in the winter, a grave robber came and the body didn't decay as much because it was so cold. That would really freak people out. Another big thing was bodies being bloated. This is super common. Bodies bloat when they die, but this would kind of make people think that they had been eating after death. And let us not forget that in Europe for many hundreds of years, the bubonic plague would spike and it would resurge. And oftentimes when people would die, they would blood would come out of their mouth after death. And especially if they started bloating and then there was blood on their mouth, a lot of people started believing that these people were eating other people after they had died. So interestingly, because in their culture, they really thought people were dying, being buried, and then digging themselves out and becoming vampires. It became really common for people to drive either a wooden or iron stake through the heart of the dead person in their casket as a way to nail them to their casket. And this is where this idea comes in of like shoving a wooden stake through their heart. Another big one was decapitating corpses and burning them. I mean, that'll do the trick. And another interesting thing that they would do is they would bury bodies face down to confuse them, which I think is really interesting. I don't, to play the devil's advocate, if someone was in fact a vampire, they died and came back to life, would burying them face down be enough? I don't know. I don't think so. The other thing I found so interesting is garlic. People would really put garlic in the casket of a dead person, as well as thorns and other holy items like crucifixes. And this was believed to protect the spirit from becoming undead. The most interesting one, the thorns, make sense because I think it's like a callback to Jesus, and so is the crucifix. But what I looked into with garlic, which I found so interesting, was that a lot of these deaths were related to the bubonic plague. And in the ancient world, and specifically medieval Europe, garlic was a very common plant that was used to heal people and keep them healthy. It's really good for you. It's an anti-inflammatory. And people were using garlic as kind of a cure-all. So they would put garlic in the caskets of people thinking that it would prevent them from becoming vampires. Almost like being a vampire was like an extra sickness on top of the bubonic plague, which I find so interesting. However, some other things that I'd never heard of is sometimes people put poppy seeds or grain in the casket. They would also sometimes put poppy seeds, grains, or rice around the house because of this rumor that vampires basically had OCD and they would be compelled to count things before proceeding. And I think that's such a bizarre and interesting belief. And truly unhinged. But I think I did try to look into that, and that seems like it's also a thing in the Philippines and a few other cultures. And I have a feeling that that practice is derived from quote unquote like ancient witchcraft, creating like seals with salt or sometimes even flour, like as protection around you. And maybe the dogma of them having to count it came later. But perhaps this idea of using a sacred substance that is pulverized, like comes from the ancient arts of witchcraft. That's just my inference. So the thing that I really want to hammer home is that the bubonic plague is a really big part of vampire mythology. People were dying pretty quickly. They would often cough up blood, and would often have blood come from their mouth after death. And so this was a really big part of the culture. It really fueled these vampire myths. It added fuel to the fire. And that was a big part of what shaped these myths. But this is what I really want to get into. But you know what? First, let's take a break. Hey, little Pepper. This is Annabelle here, reporting live from Pepper World HQ. If you enjoy the podcast, it would help so much if you could follow me. You could write a comment, give me 5 stars perhaps. Also, I would love to hear from you. Email in at esotericanonnonsense@gmail.com. I'd love to hear about your stories. I'd love to hear about suggestions. I would love to hear about any kind of weird, freaky thing that comes to your mind. Also, if you would like to support my podcast, you can follow me on Patreon. It's Patreon.com/esotericanonnonsense. I will also have a YouTube page coming at you so soon. And I also sell merch. You can look up my merch. It's in the show notes for every single episode, as well as the show notes for my show. I appreciate you so much. I made this podcast to connect with cool, freaky people like you. So thank you so much. And we're back. Okay, I was getting ahead of myself. Really quickly, before I get into the meat of what I couldn't wait to tell you, I do want to bring up some honorable mentions of things that I find really interesting that I had never heard about. And specifically this practice of putting a wooden stake through the heart of a dead person in their casket. What I discovered is that most commonly people would use oak, ash, hawthorn, or aspen wood. And specifically aspen wood was used most commonly, if people could afford it, to use as a stake to drive through the heart of their dead, because it is believed in Eastern Europe, at least, that aspen wood was the same wood that was used to crucify Jesus. So they believed that it was extra magical. And I find that so fascinating. I never really realized that for so long, people were using the same wood that they crucified Jesus with, thinking that it was extra special. That kind of really blew my mind. And I do think about how much we have forgotten local beliefs and dogma about specific plants. And really what I'm talking about is I grew up watching movies with vampires where people put wooden stakes through their heart. And we don't really know where that comes from. It's just a wooden stake through the heart and it works. But it's so interesting to me that in some European cultures, it was a specific kind of wood because of its relationship to Jesus and holiness that would then kill the vampires who were, possessed spirits. I think that's so interesting. And it's so interesting to me how these things become part of lore and then they lose their meaning, I think my first vampire movie I was obsessed with was The Little Vampire, right? Do you remember that movie, The Little Vampire? I loved that movie. And that was kind of the only thing that the guy used. There was the vampire hunter who was this total prick. And he was this greasy butt crack man. And I'm pretty sure the wooden stakes were his only weapon. I don't think he used silver bullets or anything. It was just wooden stakes. And he had a crucifix and he had some garlic and stuff. But I just find that so interesting to me. And I think that's why I wanted to start this podcast, because I'm so interested in the ancient world and I'm so interested in the legacy of our ancestors, our global ancestors from around the world, and their beliefs, and how much their beliefs have shaped our reality. And it's kind of everywhere. Like even in silly little stories or movies that are make-believe are shaped by these ideas that humans had hundreds, thousands of years ago. And I just find that so fascinating that these beliefs are like hiding in plain sight, and we often don't investigate them. I find that so interesting. So this is what I was so excited to talk about. This is the real meat. One very, very interesting aspect of vampire lore relates to UFOs and aliens, specifically the Carpathian Mountains. The Carpathian Mountains is an area in Transylvania that is noted for frequent UFO sightings and strange lights in the sky. So obviously, for a long time, this has an area that's been associated with mystery and intrigue, and of course now in modern times with aliens and UFOs. But of course, in maybe a more medieval setting, if you don't really think about aliens, like you might think these lights are people practicing witchcraft or like some kind of demonic activity. And so there are some people who believe that the region is like particularly magic and holds energetic properties such as strong geomagnetic fields. However, a lot of local legends speak of supernatural beings, mysterious disappearances, blood-drinking creatures, and they're often related to sightings of bright lights in the sky. I'm not making this up. This is like some real shit. This is not like new shit. This is some old school Transylvanian lore, which I didn't fucking realize. So, call back. I don't know if you ever listened to my 2-part episode about aliens. However, I basically read from this book, which is called The Introduction to Aliens, and it is an alleged translation of a book from the Soviet Union that they would give to spies, to special, what are they called? Special agents, as kind of like a very simplified, brief overview of the known alien races to human beings, when they were last sighted on Earth, and what governments they have worked with, if they have. It's a fascinating book. You can look for it online. You know what? I should put a link for it in this episode. But there is a specific alien race listed in this book that we're going to talk about, because this race, according to this book, is where the myth of vampires come from. This alien race is known as the Hanue Kondras, or often for short, just Kondras. They are an alleged extraterrestrial race. They are usually featured prominently in the fringe, so they're not often talked about. And they're described as part of a complex network of alien species that interact with humanity. They have a lot of different accounts of like what people describe them as, but most people describe them as creatures who drink blood and who experiment on humans. I am going to read to you what is written in the book I was mentioning from the USSR. It's again super, super brief. I'll go into some more details of like alleged information online, but this is what the book from the USSR says. The Kondras come from the galaxy Sexton's dwarf SPH. No idea where that is. They first visited Earth in 934 AD in the area that we now know as Romania. That's where Transylvania is, by the way. They are known to abduct and kill humans. They also drain and drink the blood of humans as well as the blood of animals. They are responsible for the myth of vampires. Several human governments know and accept their actions. There the peppers go. The human bodies that they use are never returned. Their last sighting was in Scotland in 1996. And you know what's crazy? That's where the little vampire takes place. Oh my gosh. Okay, these peppers are going at it. I need to close the window. We'll be right back. Planet Earth can be a terrifying place sometimes. Why is that? Because of humanity, human beings. However, I would like to remind you that planet Earth is a beautiful planet, and a big reason why is because of plants. Plants are amazing. Plants are so magical. Plants are the original OG life force on this planet. Plants can heal us, and plants necessitate our health. This is your reminder. Maybe you should plant a plant this year. If you're worried about plants, maybe you can have a succulent, like an agave. Agaves are amazing because it's almost impossible to kill agaves. And you can use them on your skin. You can use them if you have a sunburn. You can use them for moisturization. You can actually drink the pulp if you ever have a cold. Plants are incredible. The list goes on. You already know. But research some plants. Plant a house in... Plant a house? No. Plant a plant within your house. Maybe plant a tree outside of your house. If everyone on Earth planted a tree today, that would be almost 8 billion more trees. Let's do this as a team, baby. And we're back, baby boy. Okay, so according to a lot of other online sources about this alien race known as the Contras, they're described as being humanoid in form and specifically are considered to be pale, tall, and slender. They're described as having smooth or translucent skin that sometimes appears to emit a faint glow. They're known to have large almond-shaped eyes with a piercing or hypnotic quality. They have delicate, almost ethereal features, giving them an otherworldly appearance. They're typically described to be taller than humans, ranging from 7 to 10 feet. Their movements are said to be graceful, almost floating, which contributes to their mystical reputation. They are said to originate from a distant star system, often unnamed or linked to the obscure constellations. Some sources suggest that they come from another dimension or a higher plane of existence, making them interdimensional beings rather than strictly extraterrestrial. They are believed to have visited Earth in ancient times and may have been mistaken for gods, spirits, or supernatural beings by early civilizations. Their presence is linked to various myths, particularly those involving vampires. Dude, what? So of course, their biggest characteristic, which is the most infamous, is that they are known for consuming the blood and life force as a physical necessity or perhaps as part of a ritual. This behavior has inspired myths of vampires, leading some to classify them as energy vampires rather than traditional blood drinkers. They also have a reputation for telepathic and hypnotic abilities. They possess advanced mental capabilities, including telepathic communication and the ability to influence or control human minds. Some stories describe their ability to induce paralysis or hallucinations. Their technology is described as so advanced that it happens to appear magical to humans. They are said to use crafts capable of interstellar travel or dimensional shifts, often described as glowing orbs or translucent spaceships. They are thought to be extremely long-lived, possibly immortal by human standards. The Contras are described as observers of humanity, studying human behavior, biology, and emotional responses. Some people theorize that they are cataloging human DNA and or trying to influence human evolution. Others really focus on the fact that they harvest energy and believe that that is their primary focus on Earth. According to some human lore, they speak of them harvesting energy to sustain their species. This has led to the speculation that they are involved in abduction cases or cattle mutilations where blood and bodily fluids are drained. They are sometimes portrayed as influencing human spirituality or religious systems, possibly to control populations or harvest faith-based energy. That is so interesting. The alien race of the Kondras are occasionally depicted as being in conflict with other extraterrestrial or interdimensional alien races, particularly benevolent ones that oppose their exploitation of humanity. What? I had never heard about this before. This really blew my mind. I also want to mention, we're about to start talking about Nosferatu / Dracula, because that's like really what we're all here for. Nosferatu is just trending. But I do really want to mention another aspect of why vampirism really got so popular in American culture and British culture. And a big reason for that is xenophobia and plain racism. Modern vampires are depicted with a lot of qualities that we associate with people who are sexually abusive, right? There's a lot of like hypnosis and sexual energy and motive behind a lot of their behaviors. And a big aspect to that comes from the Western Europeans being afraid of Eastern Europeans as violent people and as highly sexual people. And I'm not necessarily saying that's true. I'm saying that it was the impression that I think a lot of Western Europeans had. And I think another aspect too is that some parts of Eastern Europe still had more culture that was pre-Christian. And so I think that it kind of created more fear around these people that may be still living rurally and still be using midwives or herbal medicine or what have you, or perhaps are just like really afraid of the men. And another aspect to that too, and we're about to talk about this in a second, is that like the story of Dracula, which was written by Bram Stoker, was inspired by Vlad the Impaler. And from the Western European point of view, Vlad the Impaler was an Eastern European, so they kind of thought of him as like foreign and exotic. But a really big motive of Vlad the Impaler was he was proudly Christian and was killing Muslims. He was opposing the Ottoman Empire with full gusto and was murdering happily. So I think it's another really interesting nuance that is important to consider and talk about, that I think modernized vampires are really kind of touching on so many ancient beliefs that have been distorted through time. And I think a really big aspect of that is racism and fear of Eastern European culture. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about Bram Stoker. Who was Bram Stoker? How did he write Dracula? And how did Dracula become what is now Nosferatu? So Bram Stoker, interestingly, is from Dublin, Ireland. Who knew that? I didn't know that. He was born in 1847. He was born on November 8th, which makes him a Scorpio. And he was raised in a suburb outside of Dublin. And as a child, he suffered from severe illnesses. And so when he was very young, he spent so much of his time in his house, bedridden, and his mother would tell him stories. First of all, that is so precious. And obviously, I think this is a big foundation for him as a future writer, because he spent a lot of his childhood in his bed thinking and dreaming. And his mother really was a storyteller and would tell him a bunch of stories. And she also spoke a lot about the potato famine, which she had lived through. So she told him stories that were real as fuck, stories about death, suffering, despair, and like some really intense stories. However, and some other honorable and interesting mentions, there's no proof that she told him about these specific things, but we can assume simply because they spent so much time together and she would tell him stories. There are also Irish vampires from Irish folklore. So one of them is known as the Dirgudu. This is a creature that literally translates to red blood sucker, and it is a feminine vampire-like spirit. According to the Irish legend, she is known as a beautiful woman who died tragically and rose from the grave to seduce men and drain their blood. This tale, of course, very well may have influenced Bram Stoker, especially like the sexual nature. There's also another Irish vampire known as the Abartak, and this is an Irish dwarf or chieftain. And in some versions of this legend, the Abtark is a figure with blood-drinking revenant. So he's known to rise from the grave and terrorize people until they are finally subdued. Until he is finally subdued with a wooden sword and buried upside down. And so this one particularly feels like a regurgitation of the Eastern European story. The fact that he rises from the grave and you have to use like a wooden sword and bury him upside down. Like this feels very like a tall tale, right? Like a game of telephone. But another interesting like vampire-like legend are the banshees. The banshees are these stories of these like spirits, these omens of death that are known to like scream and screech in these like really horrifying sounds. And they're known to be terrible omens. And this is kind of like, I think it's so interesting to think about who Bram Stoker was and the kinds of things he was thinking about in his childhood. And I don't know. These are like the things I think about that I like to think about. People who lived hundreds of years before us, like what were they daydreaming about? And how does that inform their life and possibly their art? So, unsurprisingly, as Bram Stoker got older, he became really interested in researching Eastern European culture, most likely because he was drawn to how dark and creepy a lot of it is. And specifically, he became fascinated with the story and history of Vlad the Impaler. And so Dracula was directly inspired by Vlad the Impaler. And that is something that I did not know growing up. And I find that to be so interesting. And so here are some hard facts about Vlad the Impaler that you're going to start seeing, like how much this modern vampire myth that we all think of as modern day vampires is really modeled after Vlad the Impaler. So Vlad the Third was actually known as Vlad Dracula. Vlad Dracula. That is the name he was known by. The translation of that was actually the son of the dragon, which is fucking sick. We do better. However is listening, we need to do better. We need to name our children sicker names. Why don't you name your son Son of the Dragon the Third? Come on. So his father, who was Vlad II, was a member of an order known as the Order of the Dragon. This was a chivalric order established to defend Christianity in Eastern Europe against the Ottoman Turks. So these were like full-on warriors of Christianity. Like they were just not feeling Islam. Oh my gosh, did you hear that? My neck really needed that crack. Crack kills, kids. Crack kills. Okay, so interestingly, in this word Dracula, or sometimes in Romanian pronounced as Dracul, which is actually like sick, Dracul. That sounds like some cool, like it sounds like Joe Cool, you know? That's a sick nickname. Like I could see like some like stoner dude who's like kind of creepy and he's like kind of gothy, but like a skater, like a goth skater, like Dracul. That's a sick name. Write that down. So, like I mentioned, often this translated to dragon. However, sometimes this word Dracul was translated as devil. And so for some people, this surname Dracula would be interpreted either as son of the dragon or son of the devil. So of course, like people are terrified. Like this is an intimidation tactic. Honestly, it's a hot name. Son of the devil the third, son of the dragon the third. Like that's a sick fucking name. Like your fave could never. So of course, unsurprisingly, Bram Stoker just took this name directly. He took the name Dracula from Vlad the Impaler. And he also took quite a few other tidbits. One of them being about like this idea of blood. So of course, like Vlad was not considered to be a vampire. That was never part of his reputation while he was alive. However, he was known to be a very ruthless man and a man that you often weren't known to leave alive if you were in his presence, especially if you like opposed his beliefs. So he ruled over a area in Romania that was at one point known as Wallachia. And this is an area that is not far from Transylvania. So he like lived in a castle. He ruled over this area. But not he wasn't like the official ruler. He was more like a lord, if that makes sense. And he would come and go as he pleased. So again, he wasn't like an official ruler, but in a way he was like a protector and a lord. I'm using the word lord liberally. I don't think that was his official title, but I think he had the same authority in the sense that he was like a local man of importance with access to his own castle. His castle was known as the Ponari Fortress, and it was situated in a mountainous area that, again, like, you know, we're all kind of, I think most of us have seen Dracula, like we're kind of all being able to visualize it in our heads. And so, of course, like this is like really evoking this like creepy, eerie energy, this gothic symbology that is like what the Dracula story is about. This is like directly taken from Vlad's life. Another thing that Bram Stoker took from Vlad was that like he wasn't considered to be a vampire, but a lot of historical accounts paint him to be otherworldly. He's described as being cunning, invincible in battle, and known to be incredibly vindictive and to carry out very harsh punishments. So a lot of people associated this with demonic behavior. Some accounts suggest that Vlad's brutality aligned him with evil and perhaps with supernatural powers. And of course, you know, like in the story of Dracula is known to have supernatural powers. He was known to shapeshift, control wolves and bats, and hypnotize his victims. And it is like super inspired by Vlad, being just incredibly intimidating and otherworldly. But I think like a really big distinction that is important to remember is that in real life, Vlad the Impaler was a staunch defender of Christianity, and all the people he was torturing and killing were usually people from the Ottoman Empire who were trying to spread Islam through Eastern Europe. And so he was essentially like doing like a one-man jihad. He was killing people who did not align with his spiritual beliefs. And I do think that's really interesting because obviously like a big part of these vampire myths, which are nowadays very derivative of Dracula, you know, they all kind of fear the church. They fear crosses. Crosses seem to affect them negatively. And that is like a huge difference from who Vlad the Impaler really was. And I find that to be so interesting. And of course, you know, Bram Stoker was in Ireland. And like I mentioned before, I think for Western Europe, Eastern Europeans feel so foreign to them and so, you know, perhaps they would like lump them into the Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire. And so like them being Christian may not be enough for them to like feel that they are related, if that makes sense. I find that to be so fascinating. So let's get into Nosferatu. I don't know if you knew this, but the original film of the 1920s is thought to be cursed. And the original actor who played Nosferatu was thought to be a real vampire by many people. Let's get into details. This is why we all came here. Eat your popcorn, babe. Have your water. Make your tea, because we're going to get into the juicy details. This is drama. This is OG drama. So after the book of Dracula was written, it got super, super popular. And within like the next few decades, a silent film was made in 1922 called Nosferatu. And this movie, Nosferatu, was basically a direct ripoff of Dracula. They just didn't get the rights to it. So it's like, it's literally a ripoff. They just called it Nosferatu. And there is so much mystery, intrigue, and legends about this film and why it's cursed. And I want to eat it. I want to slurp it with the straw. I love the drama. So instead of Count Dracula, the vampire in this film Nosferatu is known as Count Orlok, and it was played by an actor whose name was Max Schreck. And just for some clarification, Shrek is spelled S-C-H, like R-E-C-K. But like, I mean, I'm pretty sure you just say Shrek, like Shrek, which is pretty sick. So this actor was named Max Schreck. He played Count Orlok, who was like truly like a vampire. If you've seen the original or the movie from the early 70s, or was it 69 or something? It's either the late 60s or early 70s. That is actually like my favorite iteration. The one from the 20s is kind of hard to watch. But this character, Count Orlok, is like the super creepy, pale, bald-headed man. He has pointed ears and like long pointy fingers and these like two big front teeth, almost like rodent-like. He kind of looks like a creepy, skinny, naked mole rat. And the actor, Max Schreck, brought quite a lot of monstrous realism to his character. Allegedly, he really grew his fingernails out, and he was a method actor. So he would come to set every day in full makeup and would never take it off and wouldn't really talk to other people on set and would like stay to himself. So immediately when filming started, people were terrified of this guy. And basically, like, as filming continued, the rumor started growing on the set. And specifically because he really like had a secretive nature. And another aspect to it is in German, the word Schreck translates to fright. And so this like really had people going, like the fact that his last name meant fright really had people thinking that like this man was like some kind of demon. And so interestingly, like they made a film in the year 2000. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's called The Shadow of the Vampire. And it's a movie that is about the filming of this original Nosferatu. So it stars Willem Dafoe. He plays this Max Schreck, the guy who's playing Count Orlok. And John Malkovich plays the director. And so like this movie, which is like, it takes a lot of artistic liberties, is basically like presenting the idea that the director knew that Max Schreck was a vampire and hired him so that it could be like a hyper realistic film. Now, of course, like there's no there's nothing to back up that Max Schreck was a real vampire or that the director like knew that and hired him for that. But this movie is like, it's pretty fun, and it kind of explores this idea of like, what if he was a vampire and the director knew. Like, it's kind of iconic. And so like, basically by the time that the filming of the first movie wrapped, a lot of people on set were really, really off-put by the actor Max Schreck. Not only because he was secretive and he was like method acting this creepy ass character, but also because weird things started happening. People started talking about the movie being possibly cursed, mostly because several cast and crew members reportedly experienced misfortunes during and after production. Obviously, these could very well be coincidences, but this started having people think that like there was some dark magic going on. Allegedly, some people on the crew died suddenly. There was a producer named Albin Grau, and his wife died suddenly. He claimed that his wife passed away unexpectedly during the middle of production, and this personal tragedy is often cited as an early sign of the curse of this film. There was also several crew members who alleged that they fell ill during the production of Nosferatu. The illnesses ranged from mild to severe, with some individuals who were unable to complete their work. Though no specific diseases are named in most accounts, it has been attributed to the harsh filming conditions and the lingering aura of bad luck. And ultimately, what really kind of put the nail in the coffin was that after the film Nosferatu was made, Bram Stoker's widow sued the production for ripping off the book. And so she took them to court, and they had decided that the film was to be taken off the market, and they destroyed almost all copies. Only a few copies survived. It is hard to find, but you can find the original film. And so this, of course, like, again, added to this idea that this was a cursed production. Isn't this so like freaky deaky? But I do want to mention that like there's not a lot known about Max Schreck, who is the man who played Count Orlok, this Nosferatu character. But allegedly before the movie came out, he was a respected actor with a long career in theater and film. And he was in other films other than Nosferatu. However, none of them really became that popular. And allegedly, after he made Nosferatu, he stopped acting so much. So this kind of like added to this idea that like, what if he really is a vampire? And honestly, like, I kind of love that. I kind of love that like that's all he's known for, and that people really believe that. I just feel like that's so like sick. However, one other interesting thing is that during this movie from the 2000s I was mentioning with Willem Dafoe and John Malkovich, where they're like recreating the story of the first filming of Nosferatu, it is alleged that while they were filming this movie, that there was also a death of a crew member. And the rumor became so ingrained that it inspired... Sorry. I fucked this up. The movie was inspired by the fact that a crew member allegedly died. And so in this film, The Shadow of a Vampire, obviously like the crew member is killed by Willem Dafoe's character, and he like drinks his blood. But again, this film, The Shadow of a Vampire, definitely takes a lot of artistic liberties and really like runs with this idea.
Hi there. Did you know that humans are made mostly of water? Something like 80% or something. I don't remember the stats. But water's crucial, you guys. Water's crucial. Have you been drinking water today? I highly recommend. You can also add a little bit of like pink salt or Celtic salt or some nice like real salt to your water to help your electrolytes. You can do a cucumber infusion. You could add some mint in there, some chia seeds. Like I'm
inviting you to be creative here. But I'm also here to remind you, drink your water, baby boy. Drink your water. Really helps with the function of the nervous system, the function of the bowels. We're talking optimal functioning here. Drink your water, baby. And we're back. So, this is like some other really interesting drama that led to people believing that this film was cursed. There was a screening of the original film Nosferatu, and allegedly there was a fire that happened, and the theater, according to legend, the theater burned down as well as the film. And of course, like, it is important to note that theaters often had fires because of the flammability of old film, and that everyone was just smoking openly. So like, it is totally possible that it was an accident. However, like, this just kind of, again, like, added fuel to the fire of this being like a really creepy production. And like, truly, for over 100 years, people have rumored that Max Schreck really was a vampire. Obviously, since this time, the copyright of the Dracula novel has expired, and so now people can make films and kind of reboot Nosferatu, as it's not a copyright infringement. But I do think that the original Nosferatu film almost became more interesting because it became like illegal, it became taboo, it became banned. And I think that is a really big contributing factor to the film's mystique and curse. You know, like, there's just nothing like banning a film to make it more infamous. I also find it really interesting that this character, Count Orlok, who is the character of Nosferatu, is like really like a regurgitation of an Irish man's idea of an Eastern European man. And I think that is ultimately what modern day vampirism has become. Even if we don't really realize it, even if we're thinking about Edward Cullen or Lestat from Interview with a Vampire, right? Like, our ideas of modern day vampirism is really like a Western European window into Eastern European culture. And so I do really think that we shouldn't overlook that. It's in a way a bastardization, in a way it's a reduction, in a way there's like elements of xenophobia. There's like so many layers of this onion that I find really fascinating and interesting, and also like sad. I do feel sad how it seems that in a lot of Western European culture, there isn't a lot of interest and care in the why, and why things are a certain way, and they seem to just be like regurgitated for fun. However, it is very fun, it is very cool, and perhaps Nosferatu is cursed, so watch with care. If you have not watched the early 70s rendition of the Nosferatu film, I highly recommend it. It's hard to find the original version because the original version, I believe, is in fact in German. But they basically have an English version that's partially dubbed. During filming, they had actors do a scene in German, and they would film the scene again in English. And in some parts, they would have people speak in German who didn't speak English. They would dub over them. And I've heard that the German version is the best. I just had trouble finding it, so I watched the English version. It's incredible. It's beautifully shot. It's truly an art film, and it's super, super fucking creepy. Highly recommend. And that tops us off, baby. I could talk forever, but let's keep it a short, tight hour. Thank you so much for listening. I have nothing but appreciation for you. Please take good care of yourself, and I'll catch you next week. Over and out.